we on? Are we recording?
We are so live.
Oh, fair enough.
Definitely.
Fair enough. All right. Oh, well, hello then, audience. Welcome to the second to last of the Exertis Broadcast podcast. Now, I say last because, we are going through a little bit of a name change. And come January, it'll be the JB&A Broadcast podcast. So, but until then, I do want to welcome a couple guests on the show with me today. First off, Mr. Rick Puleo coming at us from the beautiful Pacific Northwest. How cold is it up there, Rick?
A tropical 18 degrees this morning.
That is some tropic I do not want to visit. Over in the Folsom office today, Mr. Jordan Friday.
There I am. How you guys doing?
Good to have you. Good to have
Just
you.
pushing buttons over here.
Pushing the buttons, flipping the levers. Yeah. Fair enough. Love it. All right. So, gentlemen, today's topic. It's a pretty easy one. It's how to choose a Tricaster. And not so much like how to choose. I mean, you're going to choose it because it's the right product, but it's how to choose the right Tricaster for your specific application. Right?
Nice.
That's it. We like this. All right. So, Jordan, you put together a little slide deck. Why don't we go ahead and pull up the first?
Just a tiny one.
We broke our rule on this. We did more than 8 slides. So, wait,
gosh.
here. There's a great animation here. I want to make sure we use it.
No.
Boom. Ladies and gentlemen, how to choose a Tricaster. There it is. All right. So, Rick, you're my guy on this one. So, I mean, the first thing we got to do is we got to jump in and say, okay, well, look, I cheesed you there, Jordan. Let's go back to the slide.
Oh.
Let's go back to the slide. Let's go back to the slide. Ready?
No
I'm going
worries.
to pull in the next. Boom. There. Wait, there it is. Okay. So there is not one, but there is now multiple Tricasters available. So Rick, walk us through the numbers here. I've got the first 4. These are the entry-level models. Let's talk about each one.
Essentially, on the small side, on these entry-level Tricasters, each of them have 8 live inputs. And what I mean by 8 live inputs is that you can punch up to 8 different sources at any time live. So you have 8 of them available to you. And we've got a couple of models. We've got the Mini SDI with 8 live inputs and 4 SDI baseband inputs. And 2 SDI outputs. We also have the HDMI model with 4 HDMI inputs and 2 HDMI outputs. We have come out, they've released the Mini X. And I've had a question, is it Mini 10 or Mini X?
I mean, this is the age-old answer. Apple couldn't solve it, and I don't know that NewTek is going to either. So
the Mini X, it has 4 HDMI inputs and no baseband, no HDMI outputs. And lastly, we've got the TC Mini 4K, and that has no baseband inputs. It's all NDI in and all NDI out. The key feature to remember is that you have a total of 8 sources that you could hot punch at any time. You have 4 unique NDI outputs, and 2 of those outputs are baseband video on the entry-level models, the Mini SDI and the Mini HDMI.
okay, so let's jump off that for a second. So you mentioned a couple times here baseband, right? So for an audience member that doesn't understand what baseband is, explain that one.
So baseband is, I like to refer to baseband when we're thinking of a single cable whose sole purpose, whose sole purpose is to deliver a video signal. So this could be a HDMI output only, and that's the only thing I'm going to get out of it. And same thing for SDI. SDI is a single direction. So it's kind of an easy way for me to find, are you going regular old school audio and video over a single cable, or are you going IP?
Right. So it's physical cable of an SDI or an HDMI versus an Ethernet cable, right?
Cable.
And so there's one of these units, the Mini 4K, that actually has Ethernet inputs for each of the dedicated sort of, using the dedicated encoders to feed in. However, I know that's the jury's still out on that one, but it's the concept of, am I plugging this one into the network and all the sources off the network, or am I going to have a physical cable directly connecting to my camera source or my computer source, right? And so again, that's sort of like the focus point of baseband versus not. All right. So let's jump into the larger models. So these are the sort of the entry level models. This is where people can start. If you've got a smaller production, you can begin with one of these. As our productions sort of raise up in value, Rick, walk me through the next two.
Well, before we do, can we just jump back to the entry level models?
Of course.
Because I did want to mention the 410 Plus. And the Tricaster mini boxes are really great. They're desktop models. They're very portable, easy to run and gun and do mobile productions. The 410 Plus is a 2RU chassis. It has all the connections on the back of the chassis. It bolts into a rack like all the other video equipment, most of the other video equipment that you have, and it has 4 SDI inputs and 2 SDI outputs. So I wanted to touch on that model. I think it's an excellent solution, especially for a nice, clean rack-mounted.
So it's sort of the pro version of the the minis, effectively. Yeah, understood. Okay, now can I push forward to the next series?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
So the TC1 and the TC1 Pro, these two models are essentially identical. They have 16 live inputs that you can hot punch at any time, 4 unique outputs. There are 4 downstream keyers, 4 M&Es, a great all around. They cover a lot of your needs. But the difference between the TC1 and the TC1 Pro, the TC1 Pro has Live Call Connect, and that allows you to establish both Teams, Zoom, Slack, Discord calls right from within the Tricaster interface itself. It does require 2 interface monitors, so that may mean for a larger footprint, but it gives you a lot of flexibility. That's the TC1 Pro.
And so of the rack-mounted versions, these are the first ones that support 4K.
Yes.
The 410 is a 1080p only version.
Yes. Now, and the one thing that I do want to mention is that when you set up your session for 1080 mode, so you're starting at 1080 mode, is 1080 session, and your output is in 1080, you do have 4 unique outputs out of your Tricaster. When you set it up for a 4K session, you only have 1 single output. And this could be critical depending on the complexity of your production.
Yep. Now, and then the last piece you mentioned on that is Live Call Connect, and that's that connection to video conferencing applications where you're able to utilize the sort of the guests on that to be individual inputs into your system. So I mean, that's to me, that's a big differentiator. If you're an organization that is looking to do any kind of collaboration inside of video conferencing, you're sort of going to want to jump straight to the TC1 Pro as your entry level. Okay, so, and then this is where we jump to the TC2 Elites. Now, there are 2 versions of it, but they both support the same I/O. So, Rick, let's walk through the I/O first on the TC2s.
So the TC2 Elite is a pretty amazing box. It has 32 live inputs on the switcher panel, 8 unique outputs in 3G SDI when you're in 1080 mode, 2 when you're in 4K mode, 2 outputs in 4K mode. There are 8 M&Es available to you, and in all cases, each M&E has 9 presets that you can save to each M&E. All the features of Premium Access are included with the TC2 Elite. The big difference between these 2 models is that the 3RU chassis does come with 2 power supplies, so you do have a redundant power supply in there. But the TC2 Elite has, again, 32 live inputs, 8 unique live outputs in 1080 mode, 2 unique outputs in 4K mode, and Live Call Connect with a minimum of or a maximum of 9 remote callers that you can bring in your UC application.
So at this point, what you're saying is, from a Live Call Connect standpoint, if you have more than the need of 4 callers, so if you want to jump up to 8 or 9, you got to go to the TC2 Elite. That's what's going to give you that extra call bandwidth, so to speap.
Yeah, and what it gets down to is again the complexity of the show that you want to create. Having the ability to bring in 9 unique callers on a Zoom or a Teams call is great, but you still have, those large 32 inputs that are all available out there. So a lot of flexibility in this on this model.
Absolutely.
Last thing that I want to mention is that if you do set up your session for a 4K mode, you can have one output in 4K and 4 unique 1080 outputs, which is a really cool feature.
Okay, so just to kind of round trip all of this, again, when you're making your decision on your TriCaster, the biggest things, am I baseband or am I IP, right? Or a combination of both. The number of input sources. So, is it 4, is it 8, is it 12, is it 16? And then the number of outputs. Do I need one output, 2 independent outputs? These are sort of the strong choices. When it gets to the DSKs and the MEs, those don't change as, I would say drastically when you get to the upper units.
Yeah.
But it's still good to know how many of those you need for your show. And so again, you can sort of choose the right TriCaster. All right, now we've got a couple different case studies, or not so much case studies, but examples of how these might be used. So here's a nice one here at House of Worship. I'd put this sort of at a medium-sized church, right? Or a small to medium-sized church. So, first thing we're going to count up is the number of live camera sources. So in this case, if you've got 4 cameras, a computer running graphics or lyrics or PowerPoint that's up on the screen. And then, of course, we've got, are we streaming directly to the CDN from our TriCaster? Or are we going straight out to iMag? So the choices on this one, you could easily achieve this with a mini 4K or a TC410 Plus.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on this one, Rick, of something somebody might need to think about?
This is an ideal solution because while in the example here with 4 cameras and 1 CPU, you still have a little bit of room to grow. You can add 3 additional sources, whether they are CPUs or cameras. And remember that once you start getting into the NDI environment, you are not stuck with that single cable connection to a baseband input. You can have as many NDI sources available on your network, but you can assign them at will. So you could be doing your Sunday service broadcast on Sunday and do a normal Sunday service show. But on Monday, you could be bringing in feeds, either 2 cameras, again, up to 8 unique sources from a different part of your campus and creating additional content. That's kind of the beauty of NDI, having all those sources available on your facility network. But you have that flexibility utilizing those 8 unique sources.
Now, Rick, would that same rule apply if we were a Saturday service, or would I have to rethink the whole thing?
You may have to rethink the whole thing just a little bit.
It's entirely different. It's completely different.
All right, let's jump over to example number 2. So let's kick it out of House of Worship and let's talk about corporations. So corporations doing all hands event spaces, any kind of meeting rooms. Let's look at what that might look like. So again, the first thing where I was going to start with was what's the number of sources? Right? How many live cameras, either baseband or IP, are coming in the system? In this particular case, we're looking at 5 cameras, right? And then we're going to jump over and we're going to add more computers. And we tend to see this sometimes in corporations. There might be video conferencing on one person's presentation versus another person's presentation. So having access to all of those. Again, iMag and stage show how we're moving content around the room so people can see it, or, obviously we could also push that out to over the Ethernet or over out to a CDN. And in this case, Rick, you sort of tagged in the 410 Plus or the TC 1 or 2. So you kind of gave a little wider berth here of what could work for a customer of this size.
Yeah, because again, in a corporate environment, they're gonna start out with the all hands space, and you're doing a more production level broadcast. You're going to be having either lights and guests coming on and off, and it's a little more produced. So definitely having additional sources is key. And in addition to that, again, with the flexibility of having more inputs, you could actually be bringing in additional sources from elsewhere on campus and incorporating them into the production. So starting out with the existing sources that you have configured for your all hands space, and then expanding out from there later on.
Yeah, and this is where Live Call Connect could come in handy as well for bringing in a remote guest or somebody who's not on campus that day.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's jump into something a little bigger. Example 3, esports arenas. I think these are becoming more and more popular. We're seeing more of these all over the country. So now what tends to happen with esports is we see a lot more camera sources than your average football game. In this case here, you pegged it at about 8, 9, 10. It looks like 10. And primarily because you've got wide shots of the screen, and then you typically have a camera over every player. And then a lot of PC sources because each of the players' computers are also getting scraped and brought in. And this kind of forces us down one path here, right? So we're going to be outputting those sources somewhere on stage or to a live audience elsewhere. We've got typically an external graphics device bringing content onto this as well for the scores and the other pieces that are happening. We're kind of just smack dab in the middle of a TC2 Elite. There's really no other direction to go in my mind. Or yours, apparently, because you put this together.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, when you're dealing with esports, again, you're going to have a camera on each one of your players, and we're averaging out or maxing out at 5-on-5. So we're looking at 10 CPUs, 10 cameras, and then we're going to also want some observers CPUs, kind of watching all the action. And of course, we have to have cameras on your announcers and play-by-play guys. Lot of sources. TC2 Elite is a perfect example, perfect solution for that because you have 32 sources that you can go to at any time, 8 M&Es that can be configured in a number of different ways. And again, 8 unique outputs in 1080 mode, which is really, really powerful.
Yeah, and then you've got the announcers sitting in there as well, right? So you have a couple cameras on them and additional graphics. So it tends to be really, really busy shows. Like the average esports show that I look at is far more complex than most sporting events. For the most part, it's pretty incredible. And we didn't even touch on replay at this point either, which is a whole nother beast.
Yeah.
So look, I think this is a good example. We got, some small, medium, large type packages, easy ways to kind of think about how to engage your customer when trying to decide, hey, what's the right Tricaster for them? All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Rick, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate your thoughts there on live production and how to choose the right Tricaster for your production. If you have any questions or just want a little more consultation, feel free to reach out, www.jbanda.com. And you can get us and the whole team available on phone, on Teams, however you want to chat. Rick, any last parting shots?
Live production is like playing an instrument in a band. It could be thrash punk where you're just banging out chords and screaming into a microphone and punching any camera, or it can be Mozart where every shot is laid out. Practice, practice, practice.
All right, Rick, thanks for being on. Jordan, thanks for running the console today. And we'll see you all on the next episode of the JB&A Broadcast Podcast.